Okay, so today's comedy. Oh, by the way, please like and subscribe to this channel. Today's comedy is going to be horror stories from the bank. Now, please note that I had a high capacity and a high level of empathy and sympathy for these folks while this was happening. I mean, it was a terrible thing, and I actually, prayed for their well-being at the time. But for the purposes of this video and this comedy, I'm going to be discussing it and perhaps talking about it in a more comedic fashion. But, please note that that's what I did at the time. All right, so the first horror story from the bank. In the beginnings of my banking career, I remember at my desk I had a younger couple, probably in their mid to late 20s, a man and a woman who sat down, to open their first joint checking account. Joint checking account. Now remember, when you open up a joint checking account with anybody, a man and a woman, two men, two women, or two friends, each person has equal authority to take out all the money and close the account, or put in money, or use a debit cards or anything of that nature, just in case you weren't aware of that. That's a good takeaway. Anyway, they sat down and they were all excited. I think that the man might have been a bit more excited than the woman, and I was talking to them for about 30 minutes while we were opening the account, and going slow and taking my time and getting to know them. And they had been dating for a while, and they seemed all happy about it, and they seemed very excited. And I guess I'm the type of person that people could confide in. When the lady went to make the deposit of a few $100, and by the way, they put about 10 grand in the account, which was a pretty good sum of money. But when the girlfriend went to make the deposit, the man told me that he was really smitten by her, and he was thinking about proposing, and he really thought she was the one, and he was, very happy with the way the relationship was going. And I said, oh, okay, I praised him and said, that's great, and I'm happy for you, and I hope everything works out, and all items of that nature. Well, about a week later, I recognize this couple. I remembered them, as I remembered all my clients. About a week later, I saw the girlfriend come in, and she went to the teller, and she took out every single penny from the account. She wiped the account out. It was over $10,000, and she took every single dime out of it. And like 2 or 3 days later, the man came back to the bank, and he was pretty livid. And he, kind of came up to me in a pretty, a very aggravated way. And in a roundabout way, he kind of blamed me. And I told him, I must have told you and your, girlfriend like 3 or 4 times while opening the account that it's a joint account. And, you both have equal authority. And I was very careful about that because I didn't want to say too much. And I didn't want to say too little because I didn't want to, give any sort of vibes or anything like that. But he was livid. And he basically told me it was every single dime of his, and she broke up with him. And, that's a lesson for you, just to be careful. And he got hosed. He got hosed really bad. I'm sure he recovered. This was a long time ago. But, I felt bad because he was young and he was making just like an okay amount of money. And it happens. And I felt terrible for that guy. And the woman, I don't know what happened to her. But I felt terrible for the man because he was livid, then he was sad. He was basically crying. It was pretty bad. So I guess the takeaway is you've learned a little bit about banking and to be careful. And this horror story was even worse. It was actually pretty similar. And not to put women in a bad light by any stretch of imagination, this just happens to be the 2 stories that come to mind. I've had, plenty of stories of great couples that seemed wonderful, or married couples that have come to my desk that I, became friendly with at that time. But we're talking horror stories. The second horror story was somewhat similar, but significantly worse. I opened a checking account. They were also a pretty young couple, maybe a little bit older, maybe in their late 20s, probably late 20s, maybe very early 30s. And it was a very similar situation. They both seemed pretty smitten with each other. It was possible the man was more smitten by the woman. And, he told me, I think that they were engaged at that time. And the parents of the man bought him as like a starter house, like a really solid, nice starter house to start a family because he was married. I believe he had just gotten married to the woman. They had just, became a became married. So, and this was in Delray Beach, right across from the ocean. So it was probably a fairly good chunk of money. So after he got married, he put her name on the mortgage. It became a joint mortgage. Even though the parents bought him the house, he put the wife's name on the mortgage at that time. So it's pretty similar. It's not too dissimilar from a checking account, where if you have two names on the mortgage, two people have a stake to the mortgage. Now, I became a little friendly with this guy and, said what's up to him every time he came in, because he came in, once a week or, 3 or 4 times a month. And after about a year and a half of, small chatting with the guy and saying what's up to him every once again, he basically told me that the wife divorced him because she found a new boyfriend. And in the divorce proceedings, she got 100% of the house that his parents bought for him, and he put her on the mortgage. And again, after separating, getting divorced, she lived in the house. Now here's the worst part of the story. Because of his job and a variety of mitigating factors, and his earnings and his wage, and having to pay, allocation at that time, the only apartment that he could get, at least this is what he said, maybe there was no ulterior thing, but the only apartment that he could get was an apartment that was right across the street from the house that his parents bought him, that she now lived with her new boyfriend, and he was directly across the street. He could basically throw a rock and hit the house. And he told me it was the worst torture. I said, dude, why didn't you just get an apartment that was somewhere else? And he gave me some sort of reasoning and logic why he couldn't. It sounded a little fugazi. Who knows? But his little studio apartment was right across the street from the house that he used to own by himself, at least for a short period, and live with his wife, who now lived with the boyfriend. That was probably the worst story that I ever heard. I mean, I actually prayed for the guy. I felt so terrible for him. I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily meant to be funny, but they were just two stories because I started thinking about my career in banking that sprang to mind, and I figured I'd throw it out there. You can, formulate your own takeaways, and hopefully you learned a little bit about banking and maybe some other life lessons from this. But those are some pretty crazy stories. Does anybody have any other horror stories from their job or from their life? Or they don't necessarily have to be funny. I'm sure you have empathy for these people and these folks, but this is a comedy channel, so it is, it is what it is. But let me know in the comments. And thank you.